Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the BOMA Kansas City program, Kansas City History, Organized Crime, and the River Quay. Please utilize the question and answer function and the chat function during the program to ask any questions of Gary. I'll be monitoring, and then we'll make sure to get to those at the end or during the program when he's ready. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Gary Jenkins. Gary is an attorney, former intelligence unit detective with the Kansas City Police Department. He has produced 4 documentary films, created the Kansas City Mob Tour app, authored 3 books, and currently produces and hosts his own true crime podcast titled Gangland Wire Crime Stories. In this popular true crime podcast, Gary Jenkins tells many stories about the Kansas City Mafia, interviews experts on Mafia families in many other cities, and has found many former Mafia members ready to tell their stories. Please welcome Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Crystal, for having me. I hope I got your name right. All of a sudden, it feel like I didn't, but if I did, I apologize.
You did.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I always like talking about this subject. It was, as property managers and people interested in real estate in Kansas City, I think it's an important story. It shows what happens when you walk away from the core part of the city for a period of time and not pay much attention to it, and how attention in my opinion, attention should be paid to the core part of the city before we keep building out and out and out. But that's my little political statement there. I was 1971, I went on the Kansas City Police Department, and interestingly enough, my first district was around the River Quay over into the West Bottoms. The River Quay was just starting at that point in time. For those of you who, if you're of a certain age, you'll have fond memories of the River Quay. If I'm in a group talking about the River Quay and I say, well, everybody's been to the River Quay, raise your hand, and all the people that are born probably 1950 and before, for sure raise their hand, because every young person in Kansas City, I would say that cared anything about doing a little bit of partying, for sure went to the River Quay. It was a rundown area right next to the city market around, it's Delaware's the main street, 3rd to 5th on Delaware was the heart of the Quay, right next to the city market, which was geographically, that made it important to other people besides the entrepreneurs that tried to get it going. A little background on that: there was a man named Marion Drizzolo who was he had some kind of a business where he put Teflon on frying pans. Now, a lot of people say he invented Teflon. He didn't, but he had some process that he was put Teflon on pans, on the early adopters of that, the early creators of that. He had a business down in the Quay, and it was really inexpensive property down there. Most of it were old, turn of the century buildings. That was the beginnings of Kansas City, one of the first actually brick city halls and those kinds of things were down on Delaware and in that area. And Main Street was that was the center of the city in the turn of the century. And Marion Drizzolo, he loved architecture. I learned this he had donated a lot of his memorabilia to an archive over at University of Missouri, Kansas City. And I got into this box and I found, I'm trying to do this documentary about the River Quay and what happened during that time and after that time. I found this big envelope, and it just said photos. And I'm going, oh man, I got all kinds of images of the River Quay. And so I get into this, I don't know, hundreds of photos, and they were all photos of cornices and doorways and windows and architectural features of those old buildings down there. And that was his love of that old architecture that really kind of stirred him, is my understanding. He started cleaning out those old buildings. He bought a couple. You could buy them for almost nothing back then. He bought a few, and I think he got leases on some of them, long-term leases. And he started cleaning them out, and he just exposed the old wood floors and the wood beams and the really high ceilings. He was the first guy into that loft business that we see today that's made so much money for so many people downtown. Was it Mel Mallon made a fortune out of that, I think, after when he got into it. As the River Quay died out, he got into the property down there, and we see what's happened since then. So Murray Drizzolo, he was able to provide really inexpensive rents to people, artists and young people who wanted to open a restaurant or a bar. And so it was, it kind of started at a real, just hardly anybody knew about it. I knew about it because I was riding a district car down there, and I stopped in those businesses and talked to people and realized this was a pretty cool area. We'd not had anything like that before. I always say if the River Quay had prospered and continued to prosper and not died out, probably wouldn't have had to build the Power Light District to bring downtown Kansas City back, because this would have already been there, because it was a lot like the crossroads in the West Bottoms have developed today. It's all grassroots development. And as it started going, more and more businesses started going. I'm trying to share a screen here. There we go. That was one of the first signs. I think that was right there at 5th Street, I believe, or almost up to the highway. It's kind of the opening going in to the River Quay, and he kept that kind of motif, that old town, spelling in an old manner, and kind of got that going, but because he's using those old buildings. But they started restaurants that, like this young guy, Nicorello, who ended up with Nick's 2121 up north of the river later on. He started a omelet place. Well, we had never heard of anything like an all omelet place in Kansas City. Had 20-some different kinds of omelets with different toppings and all that. It was really cool. I think maybe they had a wine bar. I can't remember about the bar end of it. And then they had a place called Dinkeldorf's Deli that sold what they called, let's see, that's pictures over here. Well, they had artists down there. There was a guy that took old time photos. All kinds of artists moved in, because artists, just like the crossroads, the artists, they really start because they get this cheap rent. And this guy he took some kind of arty kind of photos with this old camera. As you can see, there was there were bands. This was in the Ebenezer's was the name of it. The building's still called Ebenezer's. You can see it there on the etched into the stone. That may have been one of the original city government buildings, I believe. They had this really cool band that I played. If you'll see, they're like on top of an office that was built inside this big open space, and the rest of it was all bar, and they'd get on top of that and rock and roll all night long. It was a lot of fun. I spent several nights down there myself. There was the blacksmith, produced art objects out of iron. I had all kinds of boutiques, small boutiques with more modern clothes and objects that local artists had made to hang on your walls, and paintings and that kind of thing. There was several artists, Philomene Bennett and oh gosh, all of a sudden I forgot her husband's name, where they had a space that they loved this art space because they said it was like 50 feet tall and all kinds of light coming in, and they produced more high-end art for people, for their potential customers. But again, artists, it's hard to make any money like that. You got much overhead. You may sell one piece for a lot of money, but you may not sell another piece for months and months. Sometimes they weren't making it commercially. Most of these were not real highly commercial artists. Well, during that time, there was a man named Fred Bonadonna that had a place down on Southwest Boulevard. Fred was a local Kansas City guy. He grew up in the North End. His dad was a man named David Bonadonna, and David was a professional criminal, for want of a better term, and a mob associate. He wasn't what we call a mafia member. There's only a few actual members of the La Cosa Nostra mafia in Kansas City. We had a family at that time. We still kind of have some remnants of it. as a question that many people have. Well, is there still a mafia in Kansas City? And there is still some remnants of it. They're not as successful and highly organized as they once were, but I've got people tell me that they still, some of the older guys still get together, and you'll find them in a restaurant once in a while, just sitting and talking, and so they at least maintain contact. I don't keep my finger on that pulse. I don't really need to know that stuff anymore. But anyway, I digress. Freddie Bonadonna was had been immensely successful, and Freddie was not a criminal, a mob associate. He had nothing to do with him. But in that world, you got to understand, Kansas City's a small town. And in that world, everybody knows everybody. They're married into each other's families. They go to weddings and funerals with the extended family members and neighbors. And it's just not that big a world. So, and his dad worked for a man named Willie the Rat Tomasano. They called him Willie the Rat. They say because he had a little rat terrier at one time, and wherever he was hanging out, probably over there in the city market where there were so many rats running around the dumpsters, he had a little rat terrier. He would run around and catch rats all the time. And he carried that dog around wherever he went. If you saw Willie Campasano, you saw him with his little rat terrier. So he got the nickname Willie Rats, and then they eventually evolved to Willie the Rat, which made him a more fearsome guy. And he was a fearsome guy already on his own. Willie Campasano was what we might call a capo, a boss. See, in the mob world, you had the boss. During this time, was a man named Nick Savella. You had the underboss, which was a man named Tuffy DeLuna, Carl Tuffy DeLuna. And you had, for want of a better term, it's kind of a co-boss, or the consigliere, which is the advisor to the boss, man named Carl or Cork Savella. They called him Cork because he tended to blow his cork every once in a while. And he was a brother to the boss, Nick Savella. And so Nick didn't do anything without talking to Carl. And Carl, you know, he knew his place. He was more a guy that was out on the streets. And as I went into the intelligence unit in 1976, I started learning about these guys and watching them. And River Key was really popping at that point in time. And, you know, on the weekends, you couldn't find a place to park in the evenings, or really even on Saturday during the afternoons, because so many families were going down there. People were just shopping down there, walking around. The Marion Terzola was putting on all kinds of events designed to draw families down there and draw people into the Key. And you know, in 1972, 73, 74, Kansas Cityans were fleeing Kansas City. They were moving to suburbs. If you remember, in 1968, we had the civil disturbances or the riots, and people, you know, they fled Kansas City. I had a writer for a national, it's called website's called The Athletic, I think. It's a national website that does sports things. And a writer called me, and he's doing an article about the Royals in the 70s and how important they were to Kansas City. And he's looking at Kansas City as a whole. And he made a statement to me. He said, well, would you say that Kansas City was losing its soul in 1972, 73. And I said, you know, that's a good way to put it. It was just like hollowing out the downtown. By the end of the 70s, I think all the stores had closed down. It seemed like the only thing left were some lawyers' offices, and then they started, and of course, government buildings. They kind of started building back. But this is the early 70s right now. Freddie Bonadonna opened this club right at the corner of 3rd and Delaware, and it's a vacant it's a lot there now. I didn't really notice when they tore that part of that block down, because the rest of it's still there. But Freddie bought this. He had his mom in there cooking, and his wife and his son worked in there. It's kind of a family-run restaurant, and it was one of those places, just like Nicorello down the street. You guys have all been in them. It's a kind of a place where you eat. And the owner comes sometime during the time you're eating, will come to your table and say, hey, is everything okay? How you doing? You know, I'm Freddie, and people get to know him, and he was a real personal kind of guy like that. And like I said, I mean, he just happened to have a father who was a criminal. He was not a criminal. None of his brothers were criminals. They, you know, they were just young guys trying to make it in the world. But having that connection You see, the mob, if they, like with her dad, since his dad was a member of Willie Comisano's crew. Now, a guy like Comisano will have a crew of professional thieves that will go out and do high-end burglaries, like truckloads of clothing or any kind of products that can be resold, and he'll have the contacts to get them maybe a truckload of clothes taken from H.D. Lee, jeans. That's one I remember. He can send it off to Chicago to have contacts in Chicago where he can get rid of that stuff. And guys like David Bonadonna would go out and do it. Some of them were like jewel thieves or fur thieves, kind of high-end boosters would go into fur stores. Back in those days, there was a lot of fur stores around. I don't think they're so prevalent today. I don't even know if there is one left. But they go into fur stores and boost a couple of fur coats. And a guy like Comisano would then have connections to help them get some money out of that, or antiques or crystal. We had a whole crew of professional boosters that would go around the Midwest, mainly stealing elite crystal. And they had a mob connection that had a way to then turn around and sell that crystal. And fur coats. That same crew was boosting fur coats too. A funny little story about that. We were working on some of them, and I got their trash. People put a lot of things in their trash and they set it down on the curb. And every once in a while, just remember this: you're doing wrong. I don't put bad things in your trash, because if somebody starts investigating you, they might come by and get your trash and gather a little evidence. So we got this trash from old Frank Clayton and Dorothy Gady. We were boosting, what we call a boosting crew or a shoplifting team, and there was a note in there that said, "Oh, thank God we got out, dear somebody. Thank God we got out of that awful state of Oklahoma." So we called down to Oklahoma City and Tulsa because we knew something had happened down there, and pretty recently. And I think it was a Tulsa call. They said, "Well, we did have," and we told them a little bit about them. Did you have any situations around art objects or crystal, high-end crystal or fur coats? And said, "Well, we did have a fur shop that a lady grabbed a fur coat and started out, and there was a guy with her, and he did what we call the block and tackle method. He was the blocker. And she started out, the clerk saw her walking out and started toward her, and he just walked toward the clerk and just, like they accidentally knocked him down. Said, 'Oh, I'm sorry. And Dorothy got away with the fur coat, but they called the police, and they knew that they were hot from that, and they actually got out. So we were able to solve that for them, because we could send pictures down to them of this couple and say, yeah, they're the ones that did it, and got them made on that case. So I kind of digress on the mob and how they make money, and these people that work for them, the associates, what we call mob associates, like David Bonadonna was. Well, they feel like he worked under Willie, and Willie would have felt like he owned David. And when Freddie got successful, now I don't want to throw too many names at you, but I mentioned Cork Savella before, and he kind of, any of these young Italian guys that are by family connection, they kind of feel like they have some say so over what they do. It goes way back to the turn of the century when the Italians were new immigrants and newly arrived immigrants, and kind of a hierarchy that got set up because the mob, a lot of them could speak English, and they had connections with city government and could help newly arrived Italian shopkeepers. Of course, they extracted a price for that, but and so that kind of paternalistic attitude toward these younger guys. And Cork Savella told Freddie, said, "You're an idiot. Don't go down there. There's nothing down there." And during this time, Cork had come into poor Freddie's restaurant. He was doing land office business. He was going great guns. And it's my understanding that Freddie, in order to needle Cork, said, "Looks like I didn't do very well down here, did it?" And he didn't say, "You were wrong." He just said, "Looks like I didn't do so well down here." And Cork walked out. But Freddie was like that. He was an impudent guy in many ways. But everybody liked Freddie. Everybody liked Freddie. He had a good friend on the city council named Bob Hernandez. And so Freddie, during this time, I'm going to show you a video of downtown Kansas City at this point in time. Let's figure out how to get that thing up here. And there was a big land redevelopment thing going on. Okay, now is this being shared, Crystal? The video?
No, Gary, it's
Okay,
still
okay.
on the poor Freddy's.
Okay, all right, let me have to try that again. Okay, there we go. That should share it. Is that shared?
Yes.
Okay, all right. This is downtown Kansas City during that time. Back when police wore brown uniforms. There's no sound of this, by the way. There's down by the Jackson County Courthouse. Look at all those people down there. Now, this strip here is West 12th Street. This was between Central and Wyandotte, right across from the Barney House Plaza, where the Marriott is now. The other room, these were all strip clubs, and these were all owned by mob associates. There's a peep show. So when the River Quay got going, these clubs are all being torn down, and they all got a lot of redevelopment money. So they wanted to move to the Quay because that's where the action was. Well, Freddie knew that they would destroy this family environment and this kind of hip young. This is the first singles bars in Kansas City. By then, there must have been 10 of them. And it was, it was a place where the young guys went to meet the young gals, those of us that were 21 to 30, and music in every club and local bands all had some place to play their music. And there really was nothing like this before. Just like the restaurants, in Kansas City, we had diners and steakhouses and buffets before, and then they started the Dinkeldorf's Deli. They sold a big mother hoagie by the inch. I never even heard of a hoagie sandwich myself. I came from the country, I guess. I knew about fried chicken and meatloaf, but and pizza. Freddie had Italian food of all kinds of, like Anthony's, for example, or Grozzo's or something like that. Nick had the omelets, and there was another guy had the Cindy's Bedspread had all kinds of different hamburgers, 20 different toppings on hamburgers. I don't think I knew it. You got a hamburger, a cheeseburger, French fries. So, and then these clubs with these good local bands, and we're all going down there. And these strip club owners wanted to move down, and Freddie knew that they would not be able to survive that kind of influence coming in. And there was so many of them. There was like 10 or 15 of them that each one of them was getting a pretty good chunk of redevelopment money, and they wanted to move into the club, and they know that they bring a rough and a bad element with them. As one of my people in my movie Gangland Wire talks about this time, one of the local lawyer, I interviewed him, who had some connection to the mob, guy named Fel Cardarella. And he said these guys, the only way they knew how to make money was have 50-year-old whores squeezing drinks out of truck drivers that came in. And so that was not what the River Quay needed. But, this is America and free enterprise. But Freddie, he had this friend on the city council. So he went to Bob Hernandez and he said, now I'm going to tell you, as these guys are applying for liquor licenses, when they apply for it, who the real owner of this liquor license is going to be, because what they do, they were convicted felons and they couldn't get a liquor license. So they had what we call a straw, another person go down and apply for the liquor license and have a little corporation form to own the business, but yet they were the true owners of it and operators. And so Freddie would tell Hernandez about who was who when they'd come in, and he'd go buzz up the head of liquor control, who at that time was a retired FBI agent. And so he would deny those liquor licenses. When they were screaming bloody murder, and they screamed to Willie Comisano. I think partly because they knew that Freddie was a mover and a shaker down there. They had formed the River Key Merchants Association. He was the president of that. Matter of fact, I had worked off duty for Freddie just before I went to the intelligence unit. I couldn't keep a job like that after I went to the intelligence unit, but they'd hire us uniform guys to come down there and just walk around, do foot patrol. And you just go in and Freddie would pay you out of his cash register, and he was a mover and shaker down there. And so they know that Willie owns David, and by proxy, he means he owns Freddie. And so they started looking into this, why they were getting a liquor license denied, and they're picking up rumors that Freddie's the one that's working against him. And so Willie, and he has a brother, Joe Comisano, who wants to move a strip club down there himself. If you're old enough, you may remember Cotton Eye Joe's ended up down there and then was destroyed by a bomb. But before that, so Willie and Joe, they get these complaints from these other bar owners that they're being denied the move to the River Key, denied liquor licenses, and it's because of Freddie. And by happenstance, a lot of facts here, folks. I don't want to get you too confused, but this is kind of an important story because it's the only conviction that came out of it. Freddie had leased the unused parking lot from the city that was right there on the west side of the city market, both north and south side of Fifth Street, because they didn't use it at night, or only used it really on Saturday mornings. They didn't use it much during the week, even during the day, but he leased the nighttime rights. And then he would charge like a couple of bucks for people to park there, and he was filling them up on, Wednesday through Saturday night. He would fill those lots up at some point in time. I'll never forget. I pulled in one of those the first time and parked, and some guy came out of nowhere and said, "That'll be $2." And like $2 in 1973, that was a lot of money. I said, "Man, I'm not paying $2 to park. Free parking." He said, "Well, you'll have to go somewhere else because, that we have the rights to it." Now, if you went into Freddie's and told him that you paid to park down there, well, he'd give you a free drink. So it was kind of a nice deal for Freddie. Well, Freddie was getting all his cash money coming in from the parking lot rent, because that was all cash. Nobody's using a credit card for anything much then, especially that $2 purchase. And so Joe and Willie Comisano went to Freddie with two things. One of them was, we want some of that parking lot money. We need a piece of that action. And the other one was, you got to help these people. You're a mover and a shaker down here. You've got to go to liquor control and help these people get these liquor licenses down here. So Freddie said, I'm not going to give you any of the money, but he promised them that he'd help them. Well, he didn't. He kept burning them. As they'd send somebody else to get a liquor license, he would burn them. Well, during this time, the city, politics as it is, there's a board, a politically appointed board to listen to any appeals from liquor license denials, or any liquor control authority, any enforcement action they took. You could appeal it to this politically appointed board. Well, as they appealed their liquor license denials to the politically appointed board, guess what? They started getting liquor licenses. They started opening up joints down there. And there was a rougher crowd that moved in. I remember a lot of us talked about, that crowd is not the same as what it was. Well, we're up to 74, 75, 76 maybe by the time I went in the intelligence unit. And they find out Freddie has been ratting them out still. And even though they figured out a way to get the liquor licenses, Willie's mad, and he's mad at David, and he tells David, and this came from one of the relatives. This wasn't like an official police report that they told anybody, but it's our understanding that David told Willie, he said, I'll ask him, but I can't make him do anything. So he goes to Freddie, he says, can you help these guys? And Freddie said, "No, Pop, I can't do it. I'm just not going to do it. These guys, they tried to take my money, and now they want me to do that. It's going to destroy my business and all the other businesses that have been set up down here in the end." So David goes back to Willie and says, Willie won't do it. Willie said, well, he said, he may get hurt out of this. And David purportedly said, if you're going to hurt my boy, you got to go through me. About 2 weeks later, we got a witness. This is as close as we came to any kind of a witness on mob murder, I think, the whole time I was doing this. A witness happened to see a green Mustang pull into a garage at 536 Monroe, which was Willie's address, just off Independence Avenue on the far east side, over there by the Askew Inn, if you know where that is, by the grocery store over there, what used to be a Safeway. And just a little garage with one overhead door, and the witness sees a green Mustang pull into that, and the door goes down. Well, that same witness is working around the area, and he happens to see that same green Mustang pull out in an hour or so. And whoever's driving it, he can't see who it is, but whoever's driving it obviously is having a hard time driving a standard transmission. It's bucking and jumping, and he kills it and takes off again. And obviously it's not the owner of the car. Well, about 2 weeks later, when nobody's heard from David Bonadonna for 2 weeks at 8th and Euclid, I believe, over in the projects, one of the parking lots in the back of it, somebody calls the police and says, well, there's some kind of a substance dripping out from underneath the trunk of this car. It's been sitting here quite a while. Go over there, and there's David Bonadonna dead in his trunk. And when that comes out, Freddie has to go underground. I mean, Freddie knows that the gloves are off. He's got a brother, Tony Mike, but he was not involved in any of this. He ends up having has a joint on Truman Road, I believe. But Freddie realizes he has to go underground. In an odd set of circumstances. There's a guy named Mike Ruffalo, who was an informant for the FBI, and a guy named Sonny Bowen, who was one of these professional thieves, a jewel thief and fur thief, and like I described, like David was. And he had a partner who was a guy named Gary T. Parker. And they were hanging out at Freddie's quite a little bit during the day and trying to be Freddie's buddy, which he's pretty suspicious of, especially Ruffalo, because Ruffalo was real close to Comisanos and Savella's, but he was also talking to the FBI at the same time. And that's why we know what happened. Now, there was never any talk about doing anything, but there was a Comisano associate. This guy may have been an actual member, but he was aligned with Willie Comisano and Joe Comisano. He was really good friends with Joe. And he had a West 12th Street club that he had been denied a liquor license and had to get somebody else to get it for him. And so he always met Joe Comisano late at night after the joints closed down for breakfast at, well, it used to be called Sambo's at the time, I believe. It was a breakfast place on Burlington, just north of the Heart of America Bridge, was the ASB bridge at the time. And they'd always meet there about 2 o'clock in the morning. They'd have breakfast and then go on home. And one night, Johnny Amaro, or Johnny Green, left there. He drove home, and he lived about a block from Nick Savella, which is at, it's in an area what was called, or is called, Philomena Acres. It's about 50th and North Flora, just off of Vivian, just north of Vivian Road. And there's a Davidson Road up there. Anyhow, he pulls into his garage. He has a garage door opener. He hits his garage door like he always does. He pulled in. Well, just around each side of the garage are 2 guys standing there, and they just step inside the garage door as he gets inside, and they blast him from both sides with shotguns. They leave, and this is a block from Nick Savella's house. It was unheard of. This was a slap in the face to Nick Savella, if there ever was one. In typical mob fashion, they find the guns about 4 or 5 blocks from the house. Any mob murder that we've had where they used a gun, you're going to find that gun, or somebody's going to find the gun. Hopefully law enforcement finds it, but of course, they've wiped all the prints off of it. And that's the thing, is they just keep the gun long enough to get away, and then they pitch it, because if they get connected to that gun, they're, with ballistic wise, they're going to catch a case for murder. So they get rid of that gun, and just like any mob murder, they find a shotgun out along Vivian Road. I don't know if they found the second shotgun or not. I can't remember. But anyhow, they found one of them for sure. So it's obviously a mob murder. It's a hit. It's a block from next to Bella's house. And Mike Ruffalo, he tells the FBI, you know, these guys down here, they were kind of talking bad about Johnny Green, and he'd already told them that. And the next few days, they continue going back down to Freddy's, and Sonny Bowen starts telling people, yeah, we did it. We killed him. And see, there was a hit out on Sonny for we don't know what at the time. They'd already tried to plant a bomb on his car, and it exploded prematurely as it hurt the person that was trying to plant it. But so Sonny Bowen, the word was out, and Mike Ruffalo, he had to tell his mob bosses, but he told the FBI, and he said, hey, you know, now they know that Sonny Bowen did it. Well, you know, of course, the Bureau goes to Sonny Bowen, and they say, you know, you know, talk to us, and he won't talk. Of course, he's a hardcore dude, and so Johnny Green has a funeral, and at the wake at Sabeto's down there on Fifth Street, about 4 days later, somebody comes in and says, hey, Sonny Bowens is down there at Mr. O'Brien's at Armour and Broadway all by himself. They were already geared up. They're ready to go. They obviously have what we call a work car. They're going to have a stolen car hidden away with guns in it, some kind of a garage that when they get to it quick and they can run and do something like this. And this was one of the first times this had ever happened in modern times in Kansas City, where 3 guys run straight down to Mr. O'Brien's, run in the back door, and 2 of them hold the rest of everybody else at the bar at gunpoint. Well, one of them walks up to Sonny Bowen sitting in a booth and blasts him and kills him sitting there in the booth, and walk out and leave. And again, find the guns over by Gillum, about Arbor Gillum, I think is where they found them. And so they just drove straight west on Armour, because this place was in Armour and Broadway. Just drove straight west, straight east on Armour to about Gillum, and threw the guns out about Gillum. So the gloves are off for sure now. David's dead. These guys are kind of Confederates of Freddy's. We never proved that Freddie went along with this or knew anything about it. Mike Ruffalo didn't know anything that Freddie had anything about it or went along with this. But it's it's on now. They go and Freddie's laying low. I'll pull another picture up here. Oh, let's see. Well, so there's the River Quay. There's Delaware City Market, 3rd Street. That's where the streetcar goes down around there and then back up 3rd Street and then down Delaware. Freddy's was right here on the corner. Downtown was up here. So you can see the proximity to the city market. As another thing is the mob felt like they had control of anything around the city market, and that goes way back. There's Dinkeldorf's Deli, had the Big Mother hoagie. So let's pull up what happened next. No, that's not it. Sorry about that, folks. There we go. Okay, now let's this was the headline. It was a building. Freddy's was, let's see. This is Wyandotte. This is Delaware up here. Freddy's was up here. So this was Pat O'Brien's, who was a I think he was half Italian. He was a gambler and a mob associate. He had Pat O'Brien's joint here, and Robusti, a guy named John Robusti, had Judge Roy Beans right along in here, and they were in this building. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, this building blew up, and inside. Anyhow, this building blew up. I'll tell a little more about that later. It shook everything in the Quay. As you can see, this was like it's probably a building 2 or 3 stories high, at least 2, and was a half a city block long this way and a quarter of one this way. And it just leveled it. If you look, you see that this is just there's a truck backed up. They're just digging the bricks and stuff out of the basement. It goes straight down from the street level. Everything else ended up over in this parking lot. It was amazing. And Chuck Haddix will, I don't know if you know Chuck Haddix or not. He does the fish fry on Saturday nights on KCR. He was working at this joint right up here was the Victoria Street Station. It was several railroad cars welded together. So he's closing up one night, and he said it shook the railroad cars. I got a little clip I'm gonna play from him in a minute. But he also said that after that, people just quit coming down to the Quay. They drive by, and I remember this. People just quit going to the Quay, and all these clubs closed down. Every one of them closed down. See if I can find one of the aftermaths here. So the police photo, you can kind of see this was the basement down here. Now there's a kind of contention between the policemen on what happened here. One of them, one of the bomb guys said, "Oh, he said I think this was high order explosives." But there's another one that I kind of more agree with him. I think it was a natural gas explosion. I think somebody went down and took the gas pipe off and started letting the gas fill up the basement, and then they used what we call a Johnny Green switch, or ignition switch. Now Johnny Green was the guy that got killed. Kind of ironic. He was Johnny Amaro, was also known as Johnny Green, and he was an arsonist. And he invented what we call the Johnny Green ignition switch. And what that is you take a book of matches, the book that folds over, and stick a lit cigarette in it and turn on the gas, and as the gas starts filling up the area, the cigarette burns down for 10 or 15 minutes, and when it hits the sulfur on the matches, then it flares, and that sets off the gas, and it just got so much gas in that basement that it just blew that building clear apart. It was unbelievable. The captain, I know the captain pretty well, the bomb squad at the time. He's making a call, and he's on the radio. He's been told he needs to respond to the River Quay, and he's on the radio, and he calls the dispatcher, and he said, "Well, what do we have down here?" And she says, "Sir," she says, "I don't know." He said, "There's just like 2 buildings that are gone. They're just totally gone." But we start investigating, and these things are never going to be solved in the mob world because nobody talks about it. And you have to have a storyteller. Kansas City, we've never really had a good storyteller. That Mike Ruffalo was the best one we ever had, and he was on such a low level that he ended up having to go in witness protection. And he testified against Willie and Joe Comisano. They were charged with extortion of Freddie on the money, and he could talk about that and help make that case. And they did make that case, and they got 5 years. That's the only of all this stuff, that's the only convictions that came out of this River Quay thing. Is that this was basically the end of the River Quay. They, all of a sudden I forgot where I was. Freddie is laying low. He's going to go on the lam and go into witness protection eventually himself. He doesn't really want to, but he'll testify against Joe and Willie Comisano himself, along with Ruffalo. And he ends up running a restaurant down in Naples, Florida, is my understanding. He died. He committed suicide in, I think, 2014. He would sneak back into town every once in a while and look around, but he did not. He stayed away. And, you know, we've never really had a good high-level mob, somebody that not only not even an informant who didn't really ever get surfaced, but especially not a witness that comes in and talks about. So we've never really had any high-level prosecutions over any local things. We had a bunch of them out skimming from Las Vegas casinos, but that was because of wiretaps and informants out of people who witness protection out of Las Vegas, not out of Kansas City. Bill Owsley, a retired FBI agent that worked this case, was a case agent on the skimming from the casinos case. He'll say that probably it's because, as I mentioned before, Kansas City is a small town. And so if I go into witness protection like Freddie had to do and testified, but he had limited knowledge to hurt anybody, and he leaves all this extended family out there. So these guys in this world know each other. They go to each other's, they're intermarried. They go to each other's weddings and funerals and confirmations and see each other at certain restaurants. And so they, you know, it's just, you know, you leave your family out there. Your family is now ostracized by a pretty good group of people, because in the end, I don't care how righteous you are, nobody likes a snitch. You know, I've turned a lot of people, but I understand. Nobody likes a snitch, and you know, kind of the whole family can get painted with that brush, I believe. And I have to agree with Bill. That's why I got a policeman, a retired policeman I played golf with, and he's Italian, and he talks about going to these different things, and one of the families that one of his kids is married into, and the different weddings and funerals and things that they go to, and I just laugh. And he does too. So, you know, it's just a small town. He didn't have anything to do with any of that, and most people don't. But still, nobody likes a snitch, is what it comes down to. So let's play a really good story that Chuck Haddix tells. Let's see. Let's make sure I'm okay. Pull Haddix up here.
While Gary pulls this video up, be sure to go ahead and add some questions in the chat or Q&A if you have anything you'd like to ask him after this video.
Oh, come on, Chuck. Where are you, dude? Let's see here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we know this works, don't we, Crystal? Because we did it. Darn it. Where is that thing? Okay, share screen. Oh, there he is. Okay. Okay, this is Chuck Haddix from the Fish Fry on Saturday night. Was the bartender or the manager at the restaurant down in the River Quay that night that had the explosion.
There were these cooks and these bus people out in the car smoking pot in this car in the parking lot. And when the bomb went up, it blew the windows out of the car. And it dropped this heavy refrigeration unit right next to the car. If it hit the car, it killed them all. And they came walking in, beating on the back door, and they came walking in, and they were smoking. And I looked at them and I said, man, that must have been some dynamite shit you were smoking. And unfortunately, that really marked the end to the River Quay. I remember the next day I went to work and people were driving through looking at the crater, but people stopped coming down there and the business dropped off greatly. And then Victoria Station, of course, closed pretty soon after that because there just was no business. People were scared to go down there.
Okay, I got some questions here. Let's see if I can.
Yes, you do have some questions.
Okay, I see that's in chat. Let me look at the chat.
I can read you one of the ones that's in Q&A.
Or our speakers, that's been us. Curious if anyone's connected from these stories to Italian organization Unico. No, they're not. Absolutely not. The Columbus Park, not Columbus Park, the social club over there at Independence Avenue where they play bocce ball and nobody, I mean, the criminal La Cosa Nostra, and it is a true La Cosa Nostra criminal organization, was known nationally as the Sabella family. It goes all the way back to, the turn of the century, really, but back to 1957 at the famous mob convention in Appalachian, upstate New York, where all the mob bosses from all over the United States were caught by Nick Sabella and a guy named Joe Filardo, who was right out of Prohibition era times, was the boss back then, were there at the Appalachian convention. But that is a little small organization that is part and parcel of the culture in many ways, but they're not connected to anything else but themselves at all.
Okay, so we have another question. Was anyone ever convicted of the murders that happened over the River Quay turf war?
No, the only conviction we got was on Willie Comisano and his brother Joe for trying to extort money from Freddie Bonadata for the parking lot. There was never even any suspects. There was a whole other mob war right out on the tails of this, which I talk about in my Brothers Against Brother documentary. The Sabellas and the Spiro brothers continued into a war that had nothing to do with the River Quay, but there was never any convictions over any of those murders. We never had a mob murder conviction yet, I don't think.
Wow. Okay, so is there currently a mob presence in Kansas City?
No, I think I mentioned this at first. I get that question all the time, and I don't really look into it, but I do know, here's what I'll tell you. I do know that some of these guys, the last ones left that are older than me, but more like in their 80s, do meet every once in a while at a restaurant, and they sit and talk, and there's some younger guys that have do some things. The arson at the Herford House, I bet y'all know about that. Vinci Pachota and Mark Sorrentino, those guys, they always wanted to be mob guys, and they were connected, and we saw them with the older mob guys. So from that standpoint, yeah, there is, but they lost after the investigation into the skimming in Las Vegas casinos. If you've seen the movie Casino, then you know that all, you don't know for sure out of that, but I can tell you it started here in Kansas City with the wiretap and a hidden microphone, and it convicted all the bosses in Kansas City, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Cleveland, and sent them all to jail. And so the next generation kind of quickly move up. They out of that, they lost control of the Teamsters Union. Roy Lee Williams, if you remember, was a big jamoke from the Teamsters, ended up being the international president. He was out of Kansas City, local. He ended up testifying, and he's dead since then. And then the government took over the Teamsters and wiped them all out and ran it as a trusteeship for a while. And it's come back without mob influence. So when you lose control of the Teamsters Union, you lose control of that stream of skim money out of Las Vegas. You don't have the power that you once had. They had a lot of power, and they could help people get elected in Kansas City, and they could through straws, they could make political donations and get some people elected who then had some political connections to help them out. And so, but they lost all that. So they're nothing now, a bunch of, gangsters that do some crime, but that's basically it.
Okay. How have you been able to keep yourself mentally strong when surrounded by a lifetime of mob activity?
I don't know. I'm nuts. I thrive on it. I thrive on action. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be a cowboy with a gun and a 45 caliber pistol, a sidearm, and a lever action 30-30 rifle, and go out and save the settlers from somebody. I don't know, probably the Indians. I shouldn't say that today, but I guess I just, that's my personality. Like some people want to be soldiers and go to Afghanistan. I wanted to be a policeman and go to the areas where it was the most dangerous, but it's the most fun.
Good. Okay, so one more question. So Nick Savella was considered the main boss in Kansas City.
Correct.
That was the question.
Okay, yeah, he was. And I explained that one earlier about how he was introduced as the boss in 1957. He stayed there till he died. You know how he met? I'm talking about politics. He met Roy Williams and became close to him, who was the head of the Teamsters in Kansas City in the early 50s, because both of them sat on a committee that chose who was going to run as a Democrat for different county and city offices. That's how intertwined the mob and the city or the county government, the city government, and the political organizations were at that point in time. And that's, you know, that's all blown apart, thank God.
Okay. We have something that came through that it says a personal story, but I don't know if she wants me to read it out loud. I don't know if it's for me to read.
Actually, I don't see that. Somebody said you came pretty close to your childhood dream. Yeah, I did. They gave me a 1971 Plymouth Fury and a 12-gauge shotgun and a 38 caliber Smith & Wesson.
Okay, were the police involved at all in the mob? So I guess, was there any inside folks?
Yeah, not that we ran across. You know, Kansas City has never had that institutional corruption. Now, we did have guys who hung out in some of these bars, and these guys would buy you, they'd be buying you drinks all night long if you wanted to hang out. So I know we had a situation that some of the guys in the intelligence unit were in this bar. This one policeman was in there, and he drank in there all the time. And it's one of those deals where the owner, he's talking to this guy back and forth, and they kind of look over your way. And then pretty soon the owner comes over to your table and says, "Hey, boys, how's it doing, guys? Can I get you a drink or anything?" and so there's kind of individuals that like to drink in bars. We did run into that, but nothing like back east or in Chicago or anything like that, where you're just totally in bed with the mob. We just haven't had that since Pendergast left, and they cleaned the police department out in 1939. And they had some of it in the 50s, protecting some gambling games. I found some articles in the Star about that. But again, it was a small group within the police department. And when Clarence Kelly became the chief, he started cleaning that out. So it's totally cleaned out. By 72, 73, it was pretty well cleaned out.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that might be all of the questions that people put in. So grateful for you coming to join us today.
Okay.
Everybody's been very enthusiastic about hearing you, and this is the most questions and comments we've had on any program. So I think everybody is grateful that you joined us. Thank you so much. Please check out Gary's website. You can see more about Gangland Wire crime stories. He's got some podcasts available for you to listen to. Thank you so much. We'll have this recording up and available on demand within the next 3 business days.
Yeah.
So
one thing I got that's kind of topical is I'm doing a movie right now about the great election fraud of 1946, where they truly did steal an election. The mob and the Pendergast organization.
well, that will be very interesting. I'll look forward to it, and you'll have to come back and do a plug for us.
Okay. All right.
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.